Hey, welcome back everyone to the Black Brain Trust. This is episode 179. I'm here with my co-facilitator, Lionel.
Hello, everyone. How you all doing today? How you doing today, Mike?
I'm good, brother. Yourself?
I am well.
All right, let me
Uh,
share my screen.
we got two mics here.
Like two chains. Please hit the like button as you come in. Share the live stream if possible. And look in the description beneath the video. We have a docket for you to follow along with. All right, this first item on the docket is from the Washington Post. Her ancestors fled to Mexico to escape slavery 170 years ago. She still sings in English to this day. She is proof of how complicated migration between the United States and Mexico can be. An 86-year-old black woman sitting in her home in northern Mexico singing hymns, hymns in English. Lucia Vasquez Valdez, where we had her name before, is the descendant of African Americans who fled the prospect of slavery in the United States for Mexico in the middle of the 19th century, crossing a border that barely existed. Her tribe is known as the Moscosos. After escaping, after escaping their would-be slaveholders, they are still living in the tiny village their ancestors settled, Nacimiento de los Negros, of, or birth of the blacks in the desert of Colua. Valdez is the oldest living member of the tribe. She speaks almost no English. Around her, she watches as young Muskogos migrate back to the United States, this time in search of jobs on farms and ranches. Her eyesight is gone. Her hearing is going too. She is the matriarch of a group whose history reflects the long view on human migration, the way a community can be pushed and pulled across borders. In the process, Valdez has watched her own culture dissipate. The Mascogos have become more Mexican, more migratory, and less attached to their patch of desert where droughts have made farming harder and harder. Across the village, people ask aloud, what is left of the Mascogos? After generations of intermarriage, most of them are no longer dark skinned. Many have forgotten how to cook the dishes their ancestors brought with them from America. They wear a traditional dress only once a year on Juneteenth, the U.S. Emancipation holiday. They speak Spanish, not English. But when Valdez opened her mouth to sing, it's like plunging into the past. She still knows the English language hymns that her ancestors brought from the United States. That's something, man. Um, it really makes you it really makes you wonder. You have to be a pretty sadistic person to really enjoy keeping people in bondage like this, and that them escaping from the clutches of an oppressor is somehow wrong. Like you should be enslaved, and this is your rightful place in society. You have to be a really sick person in the brain to really want something like this.
Well, at that time period, these slave owners, these white slave owners had actual medical terms. I forgot the name of it, where it basically said a black person that wants to escape slavery has a mental issue, and where they put out actual publications that said that slavery is a necessary evil because they have to civilize blacks and it's good for the American economy.
Hmm.
And another thing, it's something else this that stuck out to me. The wanting to remain who you are, that desire. Like the article said, most of them do not look, like us. And why put that in if you don't desire, or not desire, but want to remain who you are. And it reminds me of the native Hawaiians. They're native Hawaiians, but when you go to Hawaii, anybody that was born there can say they're Hawaiian. And the native Hawaiians, at first it was nice that, okay, we're part of the United States, okay, it's cool, but the novelty has now worn off, and they're trying to protect who they are and their culture and remain who they are. So I say to say, yeah, I agree with you. You driving these people across borders. A lot of the Bahamians come from escaped American slaves. A lot of the Canadians come from escaped American slaves. Now, you see the migration also went south into Mexico, but then those people still wanted to be who they are. And you see how these group of people lost the fight, but people still want to be who they are.
Hmm. And that part of history is never really told from that perspective, right? It's always told from a perspective of all, America, land of the free, home of the brave. It should, it should be land of the pale skin and home of the slave. That's what it really should be about. Because the perspective that they're trying to tell is that illegal migration and illegal aliens. The term alien. It's alien is only used for melanated people. It's never really used for the pale skins who came across, from Eastern Europe and Western Europe and Central Europe to lavish in the wealth of land that did not belong to them.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Um, yeah, you look into the definition of a lot of these words, you see that it only applies to a certain number of people, like old drug dealers. Yeah, you have El Chapo, and you have these other drug dealers that come from the middle Americas, which, yeah, it's wrong to do that, but you also have the pharmaceutical drug dealers. You don't really hear too much about them in the same vein of these Central American drug dealers, when they either are on the same level in terms of dealing drugs that kill people,
Hmm.
or they do worse in terms of dealing drugs that kill people.
Hmm.
It's always applied to a particular group of people.
Yeah, and we have to figure out a way to change the narrative. All right, let me get to this next one here. All right, next one is from AlJazeera.com. Russia and Africa inside a military training center in Central African Republic. Russia says it wants to help establish peace in Central African Republic.
Yeah, hello. You felt you went off.
Yeah, for I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, you left off at want to establish, then you cut off.
Russia says it wants to establish peace in the Central African Republic, but others believe it may exploit resources and cause instability. Russia is back in the Central African Republic. In a military training base located on former palace grounds southwest of the capital, Bangui, hundreds of Russian fighters, described as Army reservists, are training Central African Republic government soldiers in preparation for deployment along the country's border. The Central African Republic government hopes to regain control of the country, which is torn by sectarian violence and operations of 14 rebel groups. Central African Republic, formerly colonized by France, rich in strategically rich in strategically important minerals, diamonds, and gold. Russia has sought influence in Central African Republic before when the Soviet Union developed ties during the reign of former President Jean Bedel Bokassa before he was overthrown in 1979. In 2017, Central African Republic President Faustin Archange reached out to Russian President Vladimir Putin on the sidelines of a UN General Assembly meeting, asking for help. It was a meeting that stunned many of the Security Council, especially France, which had advised the presidents of Central African Republic for years. Valery Zakharov, a former Russian intelligence official, stepped in as an advisor to the Central African Republic's president. Zakharov gave Al Jazeera access to the military base where 3 Russian journalists were killed investigating the potential involvement of a Russian private security company, the Wagner Group. He denies accusations that Russia will exploit resources or cause instability and told Al Jazeera that Russia hopes to end conflict in the country. My job is to deal with national security. I hope restore the army, police, and all sorts of questions regarding national security, he said. The Russians came here to bring peace. To arm government troops is one of the tasks. So in the future, these soldiers can occupy the borders and peace can be brought here in the end. And police take care of the internal security. While Russia did help broker the peace deal that was signed by the 14 armed groups in February 2019, some are still concerned that Russia is playing geopolitical chess game in Africa involving China and the United States, which have already established bases in places like Djibouti. Just a 10-minute car drive away from the presidential palace is the mainly Muslim PK5 neighborhood, which is effectively dominated by Salika fighter Nimi Matar, Nimi Matar, aka General Force, who is accused of war crimes including torture, rape, and extortion, and has invaded by the United Nations security forces. He views the arrival of the Russians with deep suspicion. I trust the president of the Central African Republic. It's us who elected the president in a difficult moment. He worked well, but there's the politics that exceed him, he said. So Russia in Africa. This makes sense. Russia wants to put its pieces on the chessboard a little bit more strategically in comparison to where the United States is. The United States has over 700 bases around the world, and quite a few of them surrounding the Russian Federation, Africa, and the Soviet Union used to have deep ties together. So there's a previous relationship there. A lot of the structures were a lot of the political structures and military structures were designed around the Soviet era. So I know you have anything you want to answer?
Yeah, I remember we went over this a couple months ago when Russia first went into Central African Republic, and we alluded to this back then. I want to say it was about 2 to 3 months ago. we alluded to this back then, that yes, America has a lot of bases around the world. They have not only a bases in Djibouti, but they have multiple other bases within the continent of Africa, bases along the Mediterranean Sea, strategic locations, and also that includes bases that is um, what's the word I'm looking for? That is NATO. They still it's NATO, but it's America pushing that. That's very close to Russia's borders. So Russia is on a defense, like we always say. Russia is more defensive than offensive. When was the last time you heard Russia coming close to attacking American shores? There's more defensive. It's always America that's very near to Russian borders. So Russia is on a defense. They're more defensive and strategic. Defensive and counter counter strategic. So this is another move that they're doing.
Hmm.
How you doing, DE?
What's going on, D?
Good evening, guys. How you doing? I'm all right.
All right. You have anything you want to add about Russia being inside Africa?
Well, you're right about their. I mean, Linnell is right about the strategic move by Russia, but I don't see how. Well, of course, the French and the Americans got to complain, but they're the ones who are. They're the ones who created these armies, these uh, 10 different guerrilla groups in the country, and they're the ones who had the fighting going on while they were reaping the harvest of all the raw materials, and that's what's been happening. France been doing that for years. The British been doing it, and the French been doing it throughout Africa. America stepped in and started doing it when cell phones and the electronics that are being created now, when they found out that Africa has some of the raw materials that they're going to need for that, America started moving in because they had to get a share of it. So the Russians, the Chinese are there, the Russians have to be there.
Yep. All right, this next one is from mintpressnews.com. Saudi Arabia, Israel, U.S. all sought Bashir's ouster. So how real was the Sudan revolution? Last Thursday, the decades-long rule of Sudan's President Omar al-Bashir came to an end, as the country's longtime leader was ousted in a military coup that followed months of protests against his rule, which began in 1989. Bashir's overthrow was widely hailed in the U.S. as a revolution brought on by a people-powered movement in which women played a prominent role. Indeed, the symbol of this recent revolution has become 22-year-old student Allah Salah, which, after a picture of her speaking to a crowd, went viral last Tuesday, with some in international media dubbing her Sudan's Statue of Liberty. Given the intense news cycle that occurred last week, from Israel's elections to the Trump administration's troubling declaration aimed at Iran's military, to the recent arrest of Julian Assange in Ecuador's London embassy, little international attention was paid to last week's military coup in Sudan. For many, last week's events seem simply the logical conclusion of months of protests aimed first at rising food prices and subsequently at Bashir's nearly 30-year rule. Yet the reality of what has recently transpired in Sudan could not be further from that assumption. While Bashir's lengthy rule over Sudan has been filled with many despotic authoritarian actions and state-sponsored violence over the years, and while many Sudanese citizens were likely all too eager for a change in government, powerful forces, the United States among them, had long sought Bashir's ouster for other reasons. Much of their motive linked to the country's oil reserves. After Sudan's creation in 2011, Sudan lost control over most of its former oil reserves, and then, in order to stall a burgeoning economic crisis and prevent further destabilization of its economy and its government in the years that followed, forged closer ties with Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states. Though the Saudi-Sudanese alliance worked for a time, it ultimately soured, largely thanks to the war in Yemen. I'm not going to read all of this because I think what's more important here is that you had outside players involved in this coup, and I'll prove to you in a second how this happens. Let's go here. All right, this one is from the MiddleEastEye.net. Sudan's intelligence chief Salah Ghosh resigns military council. Salah Ghosh, the head of Sudan's Fear National Intelligence and Security Service, has resigned from his post. The country's new military rulers have said on Saturday. The chief of Transitional Military Council, Abdel Fattah al-Burnham, has accepted the resignation of the chief of NISS, the Transitional Military Council said. Ghosh had overseen a sweeping crackdown led by NISS agents against protesters taking part in the 4 months of mass demonstrations that led up to the toppling of longtime President Omar al-Bashir in a palace coup by the army on Thursday. Thousands of protesters, opposition activists, and journalists were arrested during the crackdown. The last month, Middle East Eye revealed that Ghosh, excuse me, hold on one second. Last month, Middle East Eye revealed that Ghosh had held secret talks with the head of Mossad in Germany in February as part of the plot hatched by Israel's Gulf allies to elevate him to the presidency if Bashar was toppled from power, highlighting what appeared to be a divide between lower ranks of the army and the NISS. Clashes had erupted on Tuesday between soldiers trying to protect protesters against Bashar's rule and intelligence and security personnel trying to disperse them. So what we're seeing here is that the Mossad, which is Israel's secret service or intelligence service, has been involved in partaking with the coup d'état inside Sudan. They are also involved in a couple of other coups across the Middle East, as well as the overthrowing of different governments. General Wesley Clark said in 2007 to Democracy Now! That the United States government had planned to take down 7 Muslim countries in 5 years: Syria, Libya, Sudan, Iraq, Iran, and Yemen. Well, Yemen got tossed in later as an auxiliary piece. Lebanon, and what's the seventh one? DE. Okay.
Oh, it was Afghanistan. Afghanistan was involved.
Yeah, Afghanistan. Thank you. So what we're seeing here is outside influences coming in, and they try to make it seem like, oh, well, these people on the ground were just so tired of their government. And the reality was the sanctions put on Sudan from the United States had inflated the currency. It completely destroyed their currency. And number two, the oil reserves were taken away with the split from South Sudan in 2011. So that crashed their economy. And then on top of the fact that they had um, climate change issues in terms of desertation in their farmland, so it completely came at the wrong time for them. So you had instability on the ground, but at the same time, it was made by outside influences. Yeah. Abdul in the chat says Saudi Arabia is the seventh country. I don't think Saudi Arabia was one, but I do think that they are worried.
I remember seeing an article where Sudan's I think it was Sudan's president. Yeah. Went to go see Bashir al-Assad, or
Well,
yeah.
yeah, he did. He did.
So
He was the
I
first
can
one to go.
so I can imagine how that's set
Mhm.
with the powers that be.
Let me just read this one real quick. This one is from PressTV.com. Israel was behind Morsi's overthrow. The general. Israel was behind the 2013 coup in Egypt that toppled Mohamed Morsi, the African country's first ever democratically elected president, and Israeli general has revealed. Morsi, a member of the outlawed Muslim Brotherhood Party, entered office after 2011 Egyptian uprising against the regime of former dictator Hosni Mubarak. Brigadier General Arai Eldad wrote in an article in a newspaper that Israeli intelligence officials had reason to believe that Morsi intended to cancel the peace agreement with Israel and send more Egyptian military forces to the Sinai Peninsula. In 1978, Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister um, Begin signed the Camp David peace agreement that, among other things, required Israel to withdraw all forces from the Sinai Peninsula while limiting the number of forces Cairo could deploy to the region. The peace agreement also called for resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. According to Eldad, when Israeli officials found out about Morsi's alleged plans, they made it a priority to overthrow the Egyptian president and replace him with the current president, Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, who served as Morsi's defense minister before the coup. At that stage, Israel was quick and willing to activate its diplomatic tools and perhaps even greater means to bring Abdel Fattah el-Sisi to power in Egypt and convince the then U.S. administration under President Barack Obama not to oppose this move, wrote the Israeli general. Sisi came to power in 2014, a year after leading the successful military coup against Morsi. Today, he enjoys overwhelming support in the Egyptian parliament, which voted earlier this year in favor of constitutional changes that could potentially extend his presidency to 2034. Morsi, 68, has been serving a 20-year prison term on charges of ordering the arrest and torture of protesters, 25-year jail term on charges of passing intelligence to Qatar, and a 3-year term for insulting the judiciary. The detention review panel, a team of UK legislators and attorney commissioned by Morsi's family, warned last year that he was likely to face premature death in prison, where he was being held in low standard conditions and receive cruel and inhumane treatment. Today, Jordan and Egypt are the only two Arab states to have full diplomatic ties with Israel, but the relations remain limited and taboo among the general populations. A November report by the UK-based Arabic newspaper Al Arabi and Al Jadid said Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and Sisi has been working together to persuade other Arab leaders to establish close trade ties with Israel while working to resolve political differences with the Tel Aviv regime as well. 40 years after signing the Camp David It is clear that Israel is committed to having Egypt on its side, Eldad wrote, citing Israel's reported sale of German submarines to Egypt in the commemoration of the 40th anniversary of the Camp David Agreement as evidence for his claim. Contrary to Israeli expectations, the Camp David Agreement, which was made 40 years ago, has lasted for many decades despite the lack of real peace between us and Egyptians, and despite the failure to resolve Palestinian-Israeli conflict, he argued. I probably, if I was an Egyptian, I probably wouldn't want to be on a on an Israeli-made submarine or sold submarine. Why would I want that?
You got a point there. It's a great point. And I'm learning a lot of this stuff. Well, I should have already knew, but a lot of this stuff goes deep. It's complex. Nothing is forgotten.
Mhm.
And this, like the saying goes, you only have limited friends and permanent. I forgot how the saying goes. I don't want to butcher it.
No permanent friends, no permanent enemies, just permanent interests.
Right.
Yeah. So my point in bringing all this together is that Israel has been involved in the overthrow of governments in Africa and the Middle East, while at the same time claiming, um, boycott, divestment, and sanctions is anti-Semitic, right? So there's this idea that I'm going to overthrow your government, I'm going to tear up your people and hurt your people, but you're not allowed to talk about me even verbally. Now in the United States, there are 26 states in the United States within the Union, within the federated body of the United States, that does not allow anyone to boycott, divest, and sanction Israel as of 2019. DE, you have anything you want to add to this?
The black delegation in the chat said Trump just vetoed the bill to end U.S. military support for the Saudi-led war in Yemen.
Wow.
There's a lot more to this thing than okay. Let me give you a couple of points. You know that Israel is actually getting gas from Egypt because of that peace treaty, and the price at which Israel is getting the gas right now, it is like almost free.
Mm-hmm.
That was the deal that they made with the Israelis, and the Israelis refused to give up the gas. That's one of the reasons why Sisi is out,
Right.
because they got Hillary Clinton was behind that coup.
Mm-hmm.
Hillary Clinton was behind the coup in Egypt that took out Sisi.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody talks about that. The only thing they talk about is Libya, but she was also behind the one in Egypt,
Mm-hmm.
and it had a lot to do with, again, energy. Same thing that happened with Syria. Egypt has got a lot of natural gas, and Egypt has to import natural gas, buy it on the market, while they're selling theirs to Israel for almost free. They had to take out Omar because he was the first one to go to Syria, as you guys said. But why did he go to Syria? Because he was in trouble. He knew he was in trouble, and he wanted to find out what Assad did to secure himself.
And it's a good point that you brought that up, because he also flew on a Russian Federation military plane to Syria. He didn't
Right.
fly on his own plane.
His own plane. Exactly.
He knew that he saw what Russia did in Syria, and he wanted that same sort of protection.
Exactly. They took away his oil for a reason. They took away. South Sudan was fighting with the Sudan, the Khartoum for years, and nobody cared.
Hmm. And guess who was supplying them arms?
Hello.
Israel.
See, so these people. One of the things that people are not even seeing now, that the Israelis are behind. There's a group of Boers in South Africa
Hmm.
who are fighting the government, and the Israelis are training them.
Hmm.
They're in a country training these rebels to overthrow the government and to form their own country out of South Africa. And the
Hmm.
South African government, on this idiot that they got, the president, is not doing anything about
And keep in mind that they're also supplying weapons to the rebels in Syria, right? The terrorists in Syria, I shouldn't call them rebels, because rebels gives legitimacy to them. But to the terrorists in Syria, they are getting weapons and MREs, which are meals ready to eat, as well as in healthcare. They have a HMO plan for terrorists in Tel Aviv. You know, you get shot on the battlefield, they bring you to a hospital.
it. These guys are behind everything that's going on, and everybody's got it on the wrap. When it starts to come out, the first thing is you're anti-Semitic. How can you be anti-Semitic against somebody who is not even a Semite?
Exactly. And how can boycott, divestment, and sanctions be anti-Semitic when it's against the state and not against the individual who practices in religion? I find it to be very interesting. We got 28 people watching. Can we get the likes up, please? And keep in mind that Ilhan Omar is a part of the Muslim Brotherhood herself. Mohammed Morsi was a part of the Muslim Brotherhood. One of the things that pissed off Israel was that during the Gaza conflict, they were bombing it. The only reason they stopped bombing it is because Morsi sent his deputy into Gaza, and that stopped them from bombing it. However, he was going to open up the gates, the border gates, to send aid to the Palestinians, for one, and two, he also planned to take a trip to Tehran that same year, or that same season, I should say.
Well, he was looking the other way when the Palestinians were building tunnels. They were saying Palestinians were building tunnels to bring rockets, but how can he bring rockets from the material to bring rockets from Egypt when Egypt, the Egyptian army wasn't supplying them with any material?
Hmm.
They were bringing in food. They were digging tunnels to bring food in, not rockets, food.
Hmm.
And um, uh, the other thing is Egypt has these, except for Turkey, there's no other army that can stand up against the Egyptian army in the Middle East, what we call the Middle East. Not even the Saudis with their weapons with all the American weapons that they got, are not no match for the Egyptian army.
Hmm.
And Israel cannot have something like that sitting on their side, sitting beside them.
Right, and they also just received the Russian aircraft carriers, the two helicopter the LHDs. So the landing crash for the helicopters that hold about 30 helicopters on them. They got them from France because Russia had ordered them. Why Russia would allow a NATO power like France to actually build the Mistral class warships for helicopters to be built by your adversary doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I understand that it was a good gesture by Russia to increase the to leverage the building capacity of France, because Russia doesn't have a whole lot of building capacity for ships anyways. You allowed your adversary to build it for you, and then you're surprised that they stole the electronics out of it. So you had a ship that was dead in the water. So when you really think about it, Israel, basically got the transfer of these Mistral class helicopter ships to Egypt, who they themselves would use it. I mean, who's Egypt going to go to war with? I mean, Morsi wanted to bomb Ethiopia. He wanted to take Ethiopia to war over the now dam project. And Sisi told him, "Hell no, you ain't gonna do that. You bomb Ethiopia, you bring the rest of Africa on top of your head."
Not only the rest of Africa, I can promise you, I will be one of those people. Even at my age, Egypt would have. I will be carrying my AK-47.
Hmm.
Ridiculous. Because I know who was behind it. I don't worry about that.
Mm-hmm. All right, let me get to this next article. All right, this next one is from foreignaffairs.com. Lessons from Vietnam on leaving Afghanistan. There's no good way to end a bad war, but some options are worse than others. The prospect of an end to the conflict in Afghanistan has led many U.S. foreign policy experts to ponder the ignoble conclusion of another war, now a half a century past. Vietnam reportedly offers a cautionary tale for some Pentagon officials who worry about reliving the ignominious events of 1975, when North Vietnamese and the National Liberation Front marched triumphantly into Saigon, and the last Americans, along with some South Vietnamese allies, struggled frantically to escape by helicopter. Former U.S. Ambassador to Afghanistan, Ryan Crocker, and other who worry about the humanitarian and geopolitical consequences of withdrawing from Afghanistan, one of a Vietnam redux, and hear echoes of America's retreat from Vietnam. They seem to fear an Afghanistan syndrome, like the so-called Vietnam syndrome before it, that could cripple the United States' ability to intervene militarily. Just how similar was the war in Vietnam to the war in Afghanistan, and how similar are their endings likely to be? What will be the consequences of U.S. withdrawal for Afghans and Americans? And what lessons might the United States take from Vietnam to mitigate them? Vietnam and Afghanistan are both reputed graveyards of empires, countries fiercely resistant to the will of even the most powerful outsider. The American wars in both countries were offshoots of larger global conflicts. Vietnam was a Cold War front, in Afghanistan in a front in the former U.S. President George W. Bush's war on terror. In both cases, a local insurgent forces who fought the United States took a long view, determined to wait out the superpower foe. You have the watchers in Afghanistan. An Afghan insurgent told an American reporter, "We have the time." The United States and North Vietnam negotiated the 1973 peace settlement directly with each other, ignoring their respective allies and the government of South Vietnam in the NLF. In Afghanistan, the United States is now negotiating directly with the Taliban, sidestepping its ally, the government of President Ashraf Ghani, the U.S. ally in Afghanistan. So Vietnam, before I was born, and DE, I lend on your wisdom right now because you the elder here. So do you see any lessons from Vietnam being applied to Afghanistan?
Yes and no. In the war in the war in Afghanistan uh, is a war we should never have gotten into. It seems like they nobody look at the long term when they were dealing with Afghanistan. Nobody they figure, well, we're gonna go in there and take out Afghanistan in about 6 months or so. Then we can install this guy who we get from who came from Exxon, and everything would be fine. They didn't expect that the Afghans would say, hey, we don't care about your weapons. You're going to kill a few of us, but we're going to keep on fighting.
Mm-hmm.
They never thought about that. In Vietnam, they knew that the French warned them that what was happening. They saw what happened to the French, and they still went in. And that's the difference, is that um, the, the 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 similarity is that they never have exit strategies, not even in Syria or Iraq. The United States never have an exit strategy in these wars, and it's not. I don't know. When you sit down and plan something, if you sit down and make a plan for say, like, we want to control the oil.
Mm-hmm.
How are we going to do it? Are we going to we're going to go in there and then we're going to set up our people? That's not the way you do it. You go in there and you might take out the guy, then you pull back and let the people set up their own man in there, and then you give them all the help they need, and they're going to be on your side. That's the error that these people keep making. They didn't. If they had helped Ho Chi Minh, Ho Chi Minh would have turned around and fought the North for America,
Mm-hmm.
because he was pro American, pro American. I don't know if you guys read any of his work, but Ho Chi Minh was pro American until America got into the war, and then it was all out war against America.
Wow.
Yeah, but the same thing in Afghanistan. First, the United States helped the Afghans against the Russians, so they had a plus in there. Why would they go in now themselves and try to hurt the Afghan people when they could have just, let the Afghan people build their own thing and made a deal with them? That's really wrong-headed. That's the way we act, and it's the same thing they're doing in Venezuela. If they had talked to Chavez and say, look, we'll help you. We see that what you're doing with the economy. We see you trying to turn the people, enrich the people, the poor people, give them education, all that. If they would have almost a 90% pro-American country if they had done that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
You
the
have a
errors that we make.
you have a comment in the chat. Christopher Clipper says, "De Raptor, you are wrong," but he doesn't say what you're wrong about, so I have no idea what he's talking about. I know you have anything you want to add to this about what the United States can learn leaving Afghanistan from Vietnam?
No, no, I don't have any. I don't have anything to make a comparison on that.
Well, in Vietnam, we went in and installed our people. We installed, and every time the people start fighting against one of the guys that we installed, they will have a coup. Another general will come in, and he would do exactly what America wants. Instead of staying out of the war. By the time we got into the war, and the same thing we doing in Vietnam and Afghanistan. We went into Afghanistan, took out the leadership, and installed the one who we chose. So how could I be wrong about that?
Mm.
Oh, he's talking about how Ho Chi Minh sat in on the UNIA meetings and when Garvey was in America, which he did. Um, I don't know if you know about that. Uh, Garvey did inspire Garveyism in Vietnam. Well, with Ho Chi Minh.
I know about that. But I also had to read some of Ho Chi Minh's work. Even the Constitution that well, you gotta go read his. You gotta read Ho Chi Minh's work. I'm not gonna argue with Christopher, but
Mm.
you know he knows what he knows. I know what I know. But
Mm.
I know Ho Chi Minh was very pro-American.
All right, let me get to this next one from NewYorkPost.com. Ecuador spent nearly $1 million each year to host Julian Assange. Ecuador blew through nearly $1 million a year hosting WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange at its embassy in London, officials revealed Saturday. The country shelled out a total of $6.5 million on behalf of Assange, who went into hiding there in August 2012, but was dragged out and arrested on Thursday. The 47-year-old asylum seeker was reportedly abusive towards embassy staff, ate with his fingers, and infrequently bathed and did laundry, and even smeared feces on the wall. Most of the $6.5 million was spent on security, according to the Daily Mail. The rest was used for medical expenses, food, and washing his clothes. After getting the boot, Assange was taken to a London court where he was found guilty of failing to surrender. He hired a team of American and British lawyers who he hopes will keep him from being extradited to the U.S., where he's wanted on hacking charges. Sweden is also considering reinstating rape charges against Assange that it had dropped. Most of the lawyers' bills are expected to be paid by WikiLeaks, the organization he helped found. The Ecuadorian government said Assange, who was thrown out of the embassy after his diplomatic asylum was withdrawn by the country's president, Lenin Moreno, had paid for his own expenses since last December. I find that very interesting that it cost so much money to keep him there because Assange had money. He had a lot of Bitcoin. So this idea that he couldn't take care of himself, or that the Ecuadorian government had to take care of him, spending millions of dollars, that just seems like a stretch. I mean, washing your clothes does not take a $500,000 or even $250,000. You wash clothes. I mean, you're a guy, right? Most guys don't have a whole lot of clothes. You got a few T-shirts and a pair of Air Force Ones and some Levi's. I mean, how much money could that cost you to actually do your laundry? I mean, 50 cents, a dollar. Who's really spending that kind of money living inside of an embassy? If that was the case, they should have got him an Airbnb in somewhere in South London.
Now, what do you think about when they said that he was spreading feces on the wall?
I mean, they can accuse him of a lot of things, man, because they just trying to, defecate his character for that matter. The thing is, he's a journalist. He's not some rogue person. He's a journalist. under under the law, at least in the United States, he's protected by the fourth estate. He's not some. I mean, his original career, he's a cybersecurity guy, but at the same time, he's a journalist by trade now, so he should be protected under the law of a journalist, for international journalists at that. So when you hear the New York Post and the New York Times and the Washington Post and the L.A. Times and the Chicago Tribune, all these all of these rag sheets, that claim to be journalists themselves, they also use WikiLeaks too. They use a lot of his information too. So they would take, they were taking information coming from WikiLeaks and putting it inside their articles. If he's a piece of shit, they're a piece of shit too.
All right.
There's somehow there's a lot that we're not learning about this whole situation. There's a lot we know, but there's a lot that we don't know. And I started reading and listening to other people's ideas and all that. And some of the things I've learned is that like what Mike said, he's a cybersecurity specialist, and he studied cryptography. Not cryptography, but crypto. There's a rumor going around the web that he's one of the founders of Bitcoin, because nobody has found
That's
out
false.
who actually.
That's false. That's false. That's false. I can tell you that now. That's false.
That's false.
Yeah. People speculate Satoshi not to get off topic, but real quick, people suspect Satoshi Nakamoto is either one guy or the group of people. And the group of people are the group of people who Hal Finney and a few other people. His speech, his people did a lot of break it down, and I don't think that's no. Yeah.
Well, I mean, he was very astute in cryptography, so I mean, that's always been a rumor. But back to Julian Assange himself, um, Julian Assange had a lot of financial support. I mean, people weren't getting that sort of government information that he was publishing for free. That stuff came at a price. So he was sitting on some cake, and the idea that Sweden wants to reinstate, you know, sexual these sexual allegations against him, the women had already recanted their stories.
That's
So
what that's what from what I heard. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why they dropped the case, because the women all came out and said, "Yeah, we we lied."
yeah, and they said, oh, he didn't use condoms. So where's the DNA? Where's the DNA? Come on. They were trying to Me Too him before Me Too. This was in 2012. And all the women who did mess with him in the past had came out and said, you know, Julian doesn't have to do anything to get women. Women just come to him. So this idea that he had to prey on some woman, I find that to be a bit dubious, because I'm a guy and I can look at him and tell that he's not hurting for women. He's no incel. He's more of a jawline dude than anything else. So these allegations are weak against him, and I suspect that it has to do with the British members of Parliament who were pushing for that. Um, Trying to politicize those allegations against him, as well as the judge who he went and saw last week said that he's a narcissist. Narcissism has nothing to do with what they're accusing him of. It's a completely separate issue in itself. And you're not a psychologist. You're not a licensed psychologist. So how would you know? You're involved in criminal justice, not psychology. They're like these sort of allegations are all politicized against him, and they couldn't wait to get their hands on him. You know, if Julian was a melanated person, man, you would think that this is just normal, business as usual.
They paid off a lot of people to get him.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Let me get to this next one. That's relations. It's in relation to this. All right, this next one is from Zero Hedge. Unsealed affidavit tries to put WikiLeaks in cahoots with the Taliban bin Laden. On Monday, a federal judge in Virginia unsealed the original 2017 affidavit and criminal complaint on which Assange's extradition request to the U.S. is based, offering new details including chat logs between Assange and former Army intelligence analyst Chelsea then Bradley Manning, which attempt to support a single count of conspiracy to commit computer intrusion, which may or may not have succeeded. The U.S. alleges Assange actively sought for and encouraged Manning to crack a password to access classified information on the Defense Department network. The affidavit claims details related to these charges. For instance, chat log discussions between the pair over how to crack a password, though the affidavit notes that it remains unknown whether Manning and Assange were successful in cracking the password related to the conspiracy charge. Investigators have not recovered a response by Manning to Assange's question, and there's no other evidence as to what Assange did, if anything, with respect to the password, the document states. However, the FBI produced an affidavit language throughout makes no mention of Assange's acting in the way of journalist or a publisher, but instead takes pains to paint him as conspiring to commit espionage. The document further notes that though Manning suspected the person on the other end of the chat was Assange, ultimately it took me 4 months to confirm that the person I was communicating was in fact Assange. The affidavit describes the individual in communication with Manning appeared to have extensive knowledge of WikiLeaks day-to-day operations, including knowledge of submissions of information to the organization, as well as other financial matters. So they don't even know whether or not that was Assange on the other end. I mean, they didn't have his name. They didn't have. There's no way to identify the person behind the keyboard because it's just a username or a handle. It's not like, oh, Assange's face was there, his avatar was there, and it had some white guy with this white hair. It's not likely it was him. I mean, he would never set himself up. I mean, I would never set myself up for that. But to his background, he is a cybersecurity guy, one of the original cybersecurity guys, for that matter. And okay, it's likely he could have instructed or something to that effect. But Chelsea Manning at the time was a data was an IT person for the U.S. military. So why would Chelsea Manning need instructions from Julian Assange on how to crack a password when that's exactly what his job was? If he was talking to somebody, or if she was talking to somebody, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's Assange. I mean, WikiLeaks doesn't have just one person working there. There's dozens of people who work for WikiLeaks.
Now, why do you think they're trying to pan all this? Well, because I'm learning just like the people that's in the chat. Why is it? Is it because he leaked all this information and they're trying to say that, well, he's the one that was that broke the password or got the information in the first place?
No, what they're saying is that he assisted then Bradley Manning in the intrusion of military systems to reveal, the atrocities in Iraq. my thing is Chelsea Manning at the time was already astute in information technology for the U.S. military. Why would she need his help to do that when that's exactly what she does for a living? Um, Julian Assange doesn't work for the U.S. military, so he wouldn't really know. Now, what Julian Assange would be able to do is to point Chelsea at the time to some form of cracking software like Kali Linux. I foresee that that was probably the case, that they used some form of boot CD to crack to use a rainbow table to crack passwords. Back then, password cracking was pretty simple if you had the right tools. I suspect that Julian pointed Chelsea at the time, or somebody within WikiLeaks pointed Chelsea at the time with the right tools to boot up and crack the passwords, because those military passwords, those military systems were not all that secure to begin with, which is why it's so easy to break into. They were never secure to begin with. I mean, yeah, you had complex passwords, but as long as you had the right tool, you could actually break into it. So it didn't matter who Chelsea was talking to, but in this regard, they're accusing Julian Assange with breaking and entering in, or assisting the breaking and entering into that, because they need something tangible to bring him in. Legally, they should not be able to do this because Julian was not a U.S. citizen. He was actually an Australian citizen, if I remember correctly. So now what the United States is doing in the deep state, they're leveraging the United States judicial system to reach anywhere within the world and say, I accuse you of doing this or doing something to us, so therefore we can arrest you for anything now. So that means they can accuse anybody of anything, and you could be arrested without, you know, without jurisdiction. What should have happened for Julian Assange was that Julian Assange should have been a Ecuadorian citizen now, because Ecuador at the time offered Julian Assange citizenship in 2015. So he should have been able to have citizenship for Ecuador and walk right out that embassy and get on a plane and get the hell out of there and go to Ecuador. Something's not adding up. Somebody, I suspect that that's what the rape allegations were for, to bring him in so that he could not get the citizenship. But that's where I am right now. Go ahead, Lionel.
Oh no, I'm listening.
Okay. Okay.
Um, okay. I in my daily studies, I should say that. Okay, now Tony, I'm gonna link what Tony Pimp said. He said, "Dude, has so many files and info, they have to keep him alive." In my opinion. Now I know I've heard that this has spilled over to my um expertise,
Mm-hmm.
and I've heard that he has information that he has not released yet. But crypto was started for non-censorship and liberation, all of that. And Bitcoin Cash developer, he gathered all of the WikiLeaks information files and stored them on the Bitcoin Cash blockchain and the interplanetary file system.
Mm-hmm.
So that happened. And now you have this information on the blockchain.
Mm-hmm.
All the release information. They had like Bilderberg board meetings from the 50s. It's all on the blockchain, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what they did. You know, so some of this stuff has spilled over to my expertise.
Let me answer Ronan's question. Ronan asks, did Manning already have access to the information she was in the military? No, she didn't. So she actually did compromise one of the systems to get this information. That we know, and that she did. She did do time for that under Obama, right? And then when Obama was leaving, got a pardon, right? So now what they're saying is that they found these chat logs through Jabber, which is a two-way text messaging system like WhatsApp, that this is what they were talking about. However, how did they know that was Julian Assange on the other end? There is no way for you to verify that. You don't know who's behind the keyboard. I mean, we got people in the manosphere posing as women and they're really men, and got men, people posing as men and they're really women. We don't really know who's behind the keyboard. There's no way for you to verify that unless you can actually get substantial facial recognition to know that that's that person. There's no way for you to understand to know all of these things. They haven't even confirmed this. They're just accusing him of this. Now, Preem in the chat says that Seth Rich, but this isn't about Seth Rich. This is about Assange and Chelsea Manning. So I'm not sure what Seth Rich has to do with this. Let me
Oh boy, my God. Oh, my bad.
Tony Smith says, dude has so many files and info, they have to keep him alive, in my opinion. If something happens to him, he could already have it set up where his company will dump more data into the public. Well, typical publishing agency, right? So Julian Assange has already put this stuff in cold storage. We talked about this last week. Julian Assange has already put this stuff in cold storage. They're not stupid. They will never let any of that stuff be discovered by foreign agencies. They're too clever for that. They're always 5 steps ahead of any intelligence agency. So a lot of this information that they're receiving, they're encrypting that stuff and then they're burying it. So even if you did find it, it'll take you quite some time to actually decrypt that stuff. So with that in regard, they have to operate like journalists. They can't just leak information out just to be leaking it. They have to actually operate like journalists in order to get the journalist credibility. The problem here is that the phony journalists who talk about fake news are the real fake news, while they point to Julian Assange and say that he's the bad guy when they've been benefiting from Julian Assange and WikiLeaks work the whole entire time. Kind of like people who come to the Black Brain Trust, they get some of our information and then they go run off and go make their own videos and then say, "Oh, look what we discovered." No, we discovered that first.
I think you want to go to the next one, next article.
Or did DE, you have something you want to add?
With the as regards to the charges against him,
Mm-hmm.
you're dealing with an ignorant juror. When I say ignorant, prosecutors don't put people who ask questions on juries. And as long as the government can say, "Hey, we got this. Here's what we got. We got these records showing, that he was instructing Chelsea Manning how to do this."
Mm-hmm.
Especially if you got women, they will come out and say, "Yeah, we believe our government." So they just have to come up and say that he conspired to do it. That's it. That's the way the law is written. Once we can show that you conspired, here's the information to prove that you conspired to do it, you're guilty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Raul in the chat says, Tony Smith, I think he will get a pardon from Trump for the info to see what he has on Clinton. I don't think so. A couple of years ago, Trump was saying, I love WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks is great. I love WikiLeaks. Right now, today, a few days ago, they asked him, I don't know what WikiLeaks. I don't know what you're talking about. Let me see. Raul says Trump can use this info to charge people in Congress with treason if he finds the evidence saying his investigation was a setup. Well, they already discovered that his investigation was a setup because the FBI never got access to the FBI never got access to the DNC servers to begin with. In fact, the Democratic National Committee actually went to CrowdStrike to do the forensics on it and to find out that it had nothing to do with the Russians. That it was actually some person who had administrative access to the data and extracted that data through a USB thumb drive. So there was no hacking involved in that. They just had privilege escalation abilities to extract that data that they typically would not have had on a regular user permissions level. So it had nothing to do with the Russians. So they kept blaming the Russians, but even CrowdStrike had said that there was nothing credible there for them to proclaim that a state actor actually did it. In fact, the CIA had already released information that they had the ability, or they have the ability, to breach systems and make it look like it was a nation state actor without actually leaving any evidence that it was them themselves. So typically what happens in a computer hack is that if it is a state actor, if it's the Chinese, if it's the Russians, or if it's some other agency, nation state agency, one of the things that people have to understand is that Russia and China have a very long alphabet. The English alphabet is only 26 letters. Russia's is 32. So what happens when they try to break into your system, sometimes if they're not too careful, they leave behind certain characters that are not germane to the English alphabet. So you have 26 characters in the American or the English alphabet, and you have 32 in the Russian. Those few characters that are left behind is clear evidence that it was a foreign actor. In this regard, they never found any of these characters to begin with. And plus, Russia's top guys or foreign state top guys, very seldomly do they leave traces behind. All right, let me get to this next one. All right, this next one is from BBC.com. Venezuela crisis. Maduro calls for 1 million more militia members. Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro has said he wants 1 million more people to join his civilian militia by the end of the year. The call to expand the militia, which answers directly to Mr. Maduro, comes as opposition leader Juan Guaido seeks to persuade the Venezuelan military to abandon the president. So far, the militia has stayed loyal. U.S.-backed Mr. Guaido declared himself as acting president on January 23rd, saying Mr. Maduro's 2018 election was flawed. According to the BBC's America's regional editor, Candice Payette, Mr. Maduro's call to increase the militia numbers will be seen as an attempt to shield himself from further both politically and physically. The president praised the civilian militia for its readiness to defend with arms in hand peace, sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independence and the life of our homeland during the rally in the capital, Caracas. But he also called on the existing 2 million members to get involved in agriculture, as Venezuela continues to struggle with a spiraling economic crisis, which has left people struggling to afford food. With the rifles on your shoulders, be ready to defend the fatherland and dig the furrow to plant the seeds to produce food for the community, for the people, Mr. Maduro told the crowd of militia members. Mr. Guaido, meanwhile, called on people to take to the streets to start the final phase of the end of the usurpation. He told the anti-government rally in the capital they needed to redouble efforts to oust Mr. Maduro from office. Mr. Guaido blames Mr. Maduro for the skyrocketing hyperinflation, power cuts, and shortages of food and medicine, which have crippled the country in recent years. Mr. Maduro blames the U.S. Why are Maduro and Guaido in conflict? They each claim to be the constitutional president of Venezuela. Shortly after Guaido declared himself interim leader, his assets were frozen, and the Supreme Court, dominated by government loyalists, placed a travel ban on him. But the 35-year-old opposition leader defied that ban last month when he toured Latin American countries to garner support. Mr. Guaido has continued to call for President Maduro to step aside and has urged the security forces, which have mainly been loyal to the government, to switch sides. This is interesting because the militia is not even the military. So you're talking about a civilian strike force, or yeah, it's a civilian strike force to actually to take up for the to defend the government. DE, you have anything you want to add to this?
No, have we gone through this? No, not really.
Okay.
Let me say something. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
this is like one more step for Guaido, for Maduro to solidify his people in the country.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure the world sees, you know what? If I was this brutal dictator, all these people wouldn't be fighting to save the country. They're not trying to save me. They're trying to save the country itself. They're trying to save Venezuela because they have a vested interest in it. That's what he's got to. That's what his. That's if I was him, that's what would be my step, and he's doing it exactly the way he's supposed to do it.
Yeah, I agree. And I also want to point out that what they should have done is they should have took away the travel. They should have not revoked the citizenship, but to put a travel ban on his wife so that she can't go anywhere either. See, once you trap them from any sort of mobility, you're basically cutting their legs off without actually getting physical with them. Christopher Clipper says Guaido doesn't have backing of the population in Officer Corp. He doesn't. You're right about that. He doesn't have that. A lot of people don't even like him. They see him as they see him in the same light that I think a lot of black people probably see Clarence Thomas. So he's not a very, even if Maduro did step to the side and get out of power, he wouldn't be able to hold the military or the judicial body at all because they won't answer to him. So I mean, he would have to rule with an iron fist, and that means that he would have to take control of the military. And the thing is, the military controls certain sectors of Venezuela's economy and their government. So if you don't have the backing of the military, it's over for you. There's no way in the world anybody's going to take you seriously. And that would leave the country into for the people to actually overthrow him. You know, he wouldn't be able to get them. If he can't get the military behind him, then the militias on the ground would actually take him out. They'll run him out of office in the same way Castro ran Batista out of Cuba. So
yeah, we're talking about the same military that arrested his predecessor. I don't know if you guys remember that. And these same people in the street are the ones who went and took him away from them.
mm-hmm.
And the Venezuelan military is one in South America that used to be like the Brazilian military. Every couple of years, they used to throw out the elected president and and bring in somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way Venezuela used to be run before Chavez came in. Chavez is one of the longest reigning free elected presidents in South America, really. All the others were military, came from military through coup. Chavez is the one who came up, got elected, got reelected, and now Maduro got elected, reelected, all without a military background. But the military is behind it. Why? It's not like he's paying off military officers and all that. They just fell in line. This is our country.
Yeah, the military has their own economy, so they don't really need Maduro to actually really sign off on anything. You know, they're in control in certain sectors of the economy. I think they're in charge of agriculture, if I remember correctly. So, I see we have another comment in the chat says Guaido has already said he will not, under any circumstances, run for office. He wants Maduro out for new elections held. The thing is, Guaido has already claimed to be the president of Venezuela, the interim president. So if he's not under any circumstances going to run for office, why does he call himself the interim president? That doesn't make any sense. There is no real reason for him to run for office because he doesn't have the support.
Well, he can't run for office because they banned him from running for office. So
Yeah,
this idiot Preem is I don't know where he's getting his foolishness from, but they banned him. They banned Guaido from running for office ever again.
mm-hmm.
You know, no, not ever again, but I think it's a time.
15 years. 15 years.
Yeah. But for the next 15 years, he can't run for office.
Right.
So him coming out and saying, I'm not going to run for office, don't mean anything. I don't know what Preem is getting this foolishness from.
Yeah, what he's saying is that he won't run in terms of if there's new snap elections. The only problem is if you had snap elections, they're going to vote for Maduro anyways, right? Because the majority of the country, if not almost 2/3 of the country, is actually Chavistas. So then they're going to vote for another Chavista to begin with. And plus, Diaz, who's the vice president of the country, the woman, would actually be the next president in line. So even if they did have snap elections, those opposition members would never get into office because they don't have seats in parliament. They would have to get seats in parliament first. Reno Cherry asks, so the Venezuelan generals have more power than Maduro. Your military always has more power than the president. They have the ability to take the president down. So, and plus they control certain sectors of your country's security apparatus and economic posture. So that's how that works. I mean, the United States military, for all intents and purposes, could actually take down any of these presidents in the United States. I mean, they take down other presidents around the world, so it's a given that they would take down their own.
You know what's funny about this thing is that the chiefs in the Venezuelan military were all trained at the School of the Americans.
Mm-hmm.
And anybody who knows School of Americans would understand that they're like the right hand of America in the country. And if they didn't, And if they're not acting like the right hand of America in Venezuela right now, something is wrong.
Right. Yeah, I think there's a misunderstanding that people have that at least some people that are watching, and we got 40 people watching and 32 likes. You know, hit the like button, please. There's this idea that if you remove Maduro from office, that everything will change. In fact, the things that is wrong with the country is absent of Maduro. It's separate from the president itself. The president has nothing to do with that. We saw what happened in Sudan just last week. Sudan had the same exact issues that Venezuela has, but it's all the same playbook: sanctions, outside interference, and destabilization of the country. It's the same playbook. So to think that you're going to replace one government with another and everything's going to be fine for you, you're fooling yourself. I mean, we can look at the United States. The United States has had several different presidents over the last 25 years, and none of them have been able to fix the debt that is raised up now to $25 trillion. No one's been able to fix that problem. So before you start looking at other people's governments and deciding what's best for them, you might want to look at your own domestic issues and actually fix your own issues first.
Yeah, hello. Hello. I'm
Yes,
back.
sir.
Yeah, my bad. I was hit the mute up for a little while. I'm
Okay.
back.
Okay. Let me get to this next article. This next one is from Reuters.com. Cuban president calls for strengthening defenses economy in response to Trump threats. Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel accused the Trump administration on Saturday of dragging relations with the United States to their worst level in decades and called on Cubans to strengthen the communist-run country's defenses and economy. Diaz-Canel, in a speech closing the National Assembly, said the United States is engaging in asphyxiating financial persecution that makes the import of goods and resources of primary necessity particularly difficult. The Cuban economy has stagnated in recent years in tandem with the implosion of strategic ally Venezuela, resulting in cuts in fuel and energy used by state entities and this year's shortages of basic goods such as bread, chicken, and eggs. And increasing U.S. sanctions under President Donald Trump is also making it even harder for cash-strapped Cuba to get credit from financial institutions. Cuba's economy minister Alejandro Gil Fernandez early in the day called on the government to tighten belts further and seek alternatives to imports as foreign exchange earnings decline and credit for suppliers and investment become more difficult to find. Cuba relies on imports directly and indirectly for much of what it produces and consumes, including fuel and food, and purchases the supplies with foreign currency it earns from exports and obtains through credits. Let me just stop right here. Cuba is the perfect place for a crypto economy. The perfect place for a crypto economy. They can just start from scratch. They can tie in the export of their human capital of doctors and nurses in exchange for either Ethereum or Litecoin or Bitcoin. This is perfect.
I will have to agree to, yeah. They've been doing it. They've been doing this on themselves for so long that they can bypass the sanctions. They can trade with. I would guess they would immediately trade with Russia
Mhm.
and other Russia not back, but other states that trade with Russia, such as China, they can actually get some a good economy in there by doing that. By going not going in terms of well, we're gonna have a crypto all to our own like Venezuela's doing, because what we're seeing down there is they going to Bitcoin and Dash, but collaborating with a crypto with the superpowers or going to their system.
All right, this next one is from FoxNews.com. Trump administration to allow lawsuits over seizures of U.S. property in Cuba. The Trump administration intends to announce Wednesday that it will allow U.S. citizens to sue companies doing business in Cuba, according to the senior administration official, marking another break from Trump's predecessors that threatens to upend relations with allies. The administration plans to enforce a provision of a 1996 law known as the Helms-Burton that allows Cubans who fled Fidel Castro's regime to sue companies that have used their former property on the island. Every president since Bill Clinton has suspended the section of that act that would allow such lawsuits because they snarl companies from U.S. allied countries like the UK, France, and Spain, in years of complicated litigation that could prompt international trade claims against the United States. The senior administration official said going forward, there will be no more waivers. The official spoke on condition of anonymity ahead of the official announcement. The Trump administration has signaled plans to end the waivers. It's taken the step in retaliation for Cuba's support of embattled Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, whom the U.S. is trying to oust in favor of opposition leader Juan Guaido. But if you listen to some people in the chat, they will tell you that Guaido's not running for president when in fact they're trying to make him the president. Anyways, White House National Security Advisor John Bolton plans to deliver a speech in Miami, home to thousands of exiles of immigrants from Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, criticizing those governments as a troika of tyranny. The speech at the Bay of Pigs Veterans Association is being delivered on the 58th anniversary of the United States' failed 1961 invasion on the island and attempt to overthrow the Cuban government. You know, it's interesting that they would have a Veterans Association for terrorists. You sent a bunch of Cubans to go in to overthrow an internationally recognized president, and then you honor them. But then you want to bomb another country because you say that they, they're involved in some form of terrorism against the United States, but you're harboring terrorists in your own country. I find that to be very interesting.
We harbor terrorists right here on Black YouTube, but
oh yeah,
we got lead. You know what? Let me stop curse. What's going on, Jack?
Peace, brothers.
Hey, what's going on, brother?
Good. How y'all tonight?
All right.
All right.
Oh, okay. I thought he was going to say something.
Okay.
Well, pertaining to the article. To be honest, man, I agree with Cuba on this. You know, you are America. You've been doing with Cuba is very close to America. If you look at the map, this is very close to America, and America has just been beating down their economy with these sanctions, and Cuba is in the backyard, is very close neighbors to a superpower country that's the world reserve currency. And now You got Americans down there buying up land. Cubans. Okay, remember I sent that video in the email about that couple went to Cuba and they said how much they'd pay for coffee and that like that. It was a few cents. Here in America, some people pay $2, $3 to $5 for coffee. I'm saying it to say you got Americans that will go down there and buy up all this land, and now Cubans be looking like, well, we ain't got no land. All Americans bought it up. So yeah, of course they're going to say, well, no, we don't. They're going to protect their land, protect their infrastructure. That's obvious. That it don't take a rocket science to figure that out. That's what you need to do.
Hmm.
That's what you should do, really.
Well, this is similar to what they did to Haiti. The French wanted, to sue the Haitians for their loss of property during slavery.
Jack.
All right, let me get to the next article. All right, this one is from Stratfor. China's military modernization push remains a work in progress. There's no question that China has rushed forth at breakneck speed to modernize its military over the past few decades, with the second most powerful navy in the world. China has resurrected its military, overhauled its command and control, introduced new capabilities, and expanded its logistics. The country has advanced so far that U.S. officials warned in the 2019 Defense Intelligence Agency's China Military Power Report that China has grown more confident in its new capabilities and could start actively using them. Despite its impressive rollout of new weapons and the development of new capabilities, however, China isn't ready to close the gap on the United States just yet. Whether on nuclear-powered submarines, aerial refueling capabilities, or the logistical ability to land sufficient number of forces in Taiwan, Beijing still has plenty of work to do before it can finally attain some of its most cherished goals. One prime area where China lags behind the United States is in submarines, particularly nuclear attack submarines. The Chinese Navy has added a sizable number of diesel-electric submarines to its fleets, including some of the relatively advanced design, but the number of available nuclear-powered attack submarines remains inadequate to China's needs. In contrast to its approximately 50 diesel attack submarines, China only operates an estimated 6 nuclear attack submarines. Moreover, China's existing nuclear-powered submarines, including its latest Type 093 boats, still trail far behind both U.S. and Russian designs in terms of quality, as they are noisier, possess less advanced sensors, and deploy propulsion technology that is not capable. Nuclear attack submarines are vital for China for two reasons. First, they offer China the most realistic and effective way to project military power far from its shores. While Beijing is in the process of building up a very capable surface fleet, it is not yet powerful enough to reliably break through the first island chain. The first stretch of islands that rings China's eastern shore from Japan down through Okinawa to the Philippines, let alone dominate distant waters against U.S. naval opposition. But due to their stealth factor, submarines offer China the hope of countering U.S. maritime operations far beyond the first island chain, even if Beijing cannot yet dream of exerting control over distant waters. While diesel-electric submarines are well suited for warfare within the first island chain, only nuclear submarines combine the stealth and the range necessary to engage in modern long-distance operations. Indeed, Germany and the Soviet Union built up powerful submarine fleets precisely because their surface navies could not contend with the respective fleets of allies or NATO. This is a map of the Chinese naval power by 2030 projected. I know you're a Navy guy, so I'm not sure if you can interpret what we're seeing on this projected map.
I'm guessing that's the immediate and the near immediate expanse of what they want their navy to cover. That's how am I trying to say this? That's what they want their navy to be in control of, to have power over. Obviously, you got the South China Sea and other islands, and also that's the very important route that the no, I'm gonna say the America has also. So they just basically want to be in control of the immediate, which is South China Sea, what you see in the dark blue, and then the near immediate, where you have that um, teal color. So that's what they want to be in control of.
Mm-hmm.
So and you have so you have the legend here. Say first chain island, second chain island, Chinese naval spheres. So they want to be in control of that, all of that, and that encompasses South China Sea, like I just said, Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, very near Australia too. So which means I think this may be a problem, or it's going to be a problem with Australia and America, because Australia and America are bosom buddies. Then it stretches up to South Korea and Japan, which is going to be a problem in the future because South Korea and Japan and America are bosom buddies. So yeah, you have areas of dominance, which is dark blue, and areas of advantage, which is the lighter color. So dominant, we see they are building up the um, Spratly Islands, put military boats and ships on there. So that's going to be a dominant area, and it engulfs Taiwan, which means they're going to have to do something with Taiwan, because Taiwan and America are bosom buddies also. And that stretches to the Philippines. As we went over, what's that, last week? The Philippine president,
Yep.
what's his name? It's gonna tip my tongue. But he's not okay with
Oh, Duterte.
Yeah, President Duterte. He's not okay with China spreading its influence across the South China Sea, because obviously Philippines has a right to the South China Sea also per the maritime law, and also Vietnam, Malaysia, so forth. So China wants to project themselves as a dominant in that dark blue area and an advantage in the light blue area, which is going to cause a lot of issues. And it stretches all the way to Guam, as we know, is a naval submarine port for America. So this should be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
DE, you got any comments on this one? Oh, my bad. I know you still read, my bad.
Well, right now, China is if say America has 100 submarines, the technology is superior to the Chinese. But if China have 100 submarines and they have okay technology, good drive technology, but they don't have to be silent. But if the missile technology is improved over the years, then it still will be a big challenge to the U.S., because the U.S. has to try to track all those submarines. So China is not. I think China is making sense of what they have. They're not trying to push themselves into the sphere of the U.S. because it will be impossible for them to do.
Mm-hmm.
They're just looking out for an area around China that they can say, well, anybody come within that area, we're going to know you're here. And then if you try to attack us from this area, we're going to make life miserable for you. And that's what I would do. That's what America did before it became a great sea power. You know, it sailed around the Caribbean, east and west coast of America through the Panama Canal, and that was its sphere. And then the next strike was Philippines and against the Spanish, Cuba and the Philippines, and the so-called Barbary pirates in the Mediterranean.
Mm-hmm.
That's how America gradually spread out. And then World War II, you know, when they became, you know, they gathered technology from the British to make their submarines, and then they improved it throughout the years. That's China has to go through the same process.
Mm-hmm. Let me get these last couple of paragraphs. Another Chinese shortcoming, especially relative to the United States, centers on its aerial refueling capacity. China maintains a partial fleet of around a dozen H-6U and IL-78 tankers, but that is not nearly enough to service an air force the size of China's. Aerial refueling, however, is an important method by which China could increase the range and loiter time of its combat aircraft. If Beijing could accomplish this, its bombers could reach even more distant targets, while its fighter aircraft could remain in the air longer to guard key targets. As China develops new combat aircraft like the H-20 stealth bomber, for instance, aerial refueling capacity will become all the more important to maximize the capabilities of such aircraft. I don't know about this H-20 stealth bomber. Let me Google that. I don't know much about that. What is that? Oh, okay. Basically, they copied what the United States has. That's interesting. But you know, I know we covered an article a while back about Russia using its MiG-31 fighter jet to refuel other fighter jets while still in the sky. So you imagine that it's one fighter jet dumping off fuel to another one and then taking off, go back to land. While that other fighter jet that's been refueled can go a further distance. That's actually an ingenious method of aerial refueling without using a big tanker.
Yeah, I do remember that. I do remember that. And their MiGs can fly higher in the stratosphere too.
Yeah, the 31 is meant for space flight.
Wow, that's wow. Yeah, I remember that because the suits they have to wear in order to fly them things are quasi astronaut suits. So, and pretty sure DE can speak more about this in terms of Air Force power, but I do remember covering that, and yeah, that's pretty high up in the stratosphere, really high up.
Let me ask a question. In terms of when it comes to air power, right? We talk about these jets. Like compared to you compare different countries, you compare other countries' power, right? As far as like air force and whatnot. How can you tell what's a barometer to tell you which one's stronger or not as far as air power? Because when I think a jet, they all go Mach speeds and they all have heavy artillery with the rockets and whatnot. But like, what makes another jet better than the other? Like, what is it really?
Well, the Russians have two different. The Americans use high technology. I mean, when I say high technology, they like to use pinpoint bombing. Not that the Russians don't use the same thing, but the American would like to sneak it on you and attack you, like they did in say Iraq, where they sending F-22s and the Iraqis can't see it with their radar, but the Russians have radar that can detect that. So what the Russians did is they said, we're not going to build stealth aircraft. We're going to build aircraft speed, agility, and being able to outmaneuver you. Your aircraft might be stealth technology, but we can still see it. And if we can see it, we can shoot it down because our aircraft are better than yours. They're faster, got a longer range, and they can outmaneuver you. And if you see some of the Russian pilots flying their fighter aircraft, you would think these guys are what would people will call flying saucers. They look like they're making 90-degree turns because of the maneuverability of the aircraft and the pilot's capability of flying that aircraft. So they have two different ideas of airplanes. The airplanes are certain similarities about them. If you look at the F-15 and then the Russian fighter, they look pretty much similar. But the maneuverability of the Russian fighter craft is far superior to that of the F-15, F-18, and now the F-35. The F-35 is a slow airplane compared to what the Russians produce.
And the Chinese actually copied the F-35 already. I think they call it the J-31.
Yeah, that's their copy of the F-35.
China is known for copying all types of American goods, including the routers and switches for networking. That's how Huawei got into the business. They stole a lot of the technology from Cisco, even down to the bug layer. So the same bugs that the Cisco switches and routers had, China ended up embracing all those bugs too. They didn't even bother to fix the bugs. They just kept the bugs where they were. So
every nation does that, Every nation does it. Every nation has to do it in order to build up their own. If you're coming from zero, if you're starting out, like China is like the Wild West of the world. Whereas if you're a Chinese and you got an idea on how to make something, from the time you produce the first copy, some guy maybe next door with a different company, he steal your idea and make a better one. And that's what they do. That's how it's done in China. So when the United States picked up all those factories and moved them to China, all they did was just give the Chinese all the technology that they had, and the Chinese just used it.
I'm just sharing this my screen because it shows the J-31 fighter jet that they copied allegedly from the United States. Supposedly that's a copy of the F-35. But I actually wanted to touch on this real quick before we close out of this. All right, it says what the U.S. and Chinese navies might look like by 2030. These are projected compositions of the Chinese and U.S. naval fleets by 2020 and 2030. The figures for the U.S. Navy are derived from a 30-year shipbuilding plan released in February. The projections for the Chinese Navy, meanwhile, are based on past shipbuilding rates. Although China could alter their pace over the coming decade. So it shows by 2020, combat and logistics, the U.S. Navy outperforms Chinese Navy. Diesel electric subs, I don't think the U.S. has any more of those. I think they're all nuclear now. Fleet aircraft carriers, obviously U.S. Navy outnumbers Chinese Navy fleet aircraft carriers. Large surface combatants. U.S. Navy just all around has a bigger Navy in terms of medium frigates and destroyers and whatnot at that level. But when it comes to small surface combatant ships, your corvettes, China has a whole lot of them. Mostly because they produce smaller ships at a faster rate. Now, if you look at the 2030 predictions, the combat logistics aspect, you see that China starts to catch up somewhat, but not as much as they do with their large surface combatant ships. And their fleet aircraft carriers are still lagging by even in 2030. So you won't see China keep up until at least 2045. And then you factor in their nuclear attack subs, they're still lagging behind. It's just something that they can't produce as fast as they can with small surface combatant ships like your missile cruiser, sort of small style brown water vessels, and your corvettes, for that matter. They just can't. Those are the only areas that they can actually keep up, and the only way for those to be effective is if you give them some really powerful weapons.
Yeah.
The only way they can keep up. So let me get to this next article. All right, this one is from foreignaffairs.com. The China Reckoning, how Beijing defied American expectations. The United States has always had an outside sense of its ability to determine China's course again and again. Its ambitions have come up short. After World War II, George Marshall, the U.S. Special Envoy to China, hoped to broker a peace between the nationalists and the communists in the Chinese Civil War. During the Korean War, the Truman administration thought it could dissuade Mao Zedong's troops from crossing the Yalu River. The Johnson administration believed Beijing would ultimately circumscribe its involvement in Vietnam. In each instance, Chinese realities upset American expectations. With U.S. President Richard Nixon's opening to China, Washington made its biggest and most optimistic bet yet. Both Nixon and Henry Kissinger, his national security advisor, assumed that rapprochement would drive a wedge between Beijing and Moscow, and in time alter China's conception of its own interests as it drew closer to the United States. In the fall of 1967, Nixon wrote in this magazine, "The world cannot be safe until China changes. Thus our aim Thus, our aim to the extent that we can influence events should be to induce change. Ever since the assumption that deepening commercial, diplomatic, and cultural ties would transform China's internal development and external behavior has been a bedrock of U.S. strategy. Even those in U.S. policy circles who were skeptical of China's intentions still shared the underlying belief that U.S. power and hegemony could readily hold China into the United States' liking. Nearly half a century since Nixon's first steps towards rapprochement, the record is increasingly clear that Washington once again put too much faith in its power to shape China's trajectory. All sides of the policy debate free traders and financiers who foresaw inevitable and increasing openness in China. Interrogationists who argued that Beijing's ambitions would be tamed by greater interaction with the international community, and hawks who believed that China's power would be abated by perpetual American primacy. Neither worked. So again, American foreign policy underestimates the value of the culture of a different people. DE, you have anything you want to add to
that? What China is today is a direct result of the U.S. action, not only U.S. but British and French action. To some extent, also the Japanese. I would blame the Japanese also, but the U.S. had the opportunity to. They were warned, I would say, not to do what they did with China. But they thought that if they built the factories in China, they'll be able to control the factories. They'll be able to limit China's growth and force the Chinese to enter the world economy under their rules. And that didn't happen because the Chinese government saw right through that, and the Chinese government knew, look what the British did to them. Look what the Japanese did. And throughout history, the Chinese been always like, people will come into China and then they will destroy China from the inside. That's what the British and American did. Going way back to the 1920s. You know, the herring addiction that devastated China was fostered by the British, and then the American backed up the British. So, and then Chiang Kai-shek up to America was still, so the Chinese don't trust America. They say, okay, come on in, bring your factories and everything like that. But guess what happened? The technology got taken over. And Chinese started making rules and say that limiting their movement. You know, it's like America going to South America and build a factory, and if they don't want nobody from that country can work inside the factory. You can't do that in China. So everything that America did is coming back to bite them because they had this arrogant attitude towards China.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they have the same arrogant attitude towards what would be considered African Americans, right? There's this sort of attitude that says that you know, we're gonna relegate you to this sort of place in society, and you're gonna like it, you're gonna love it. And it's like, no, actually, that's not how this works. You know, when you really think about American society, it really does not move without the black man. right? The black man is responsible for the light bulb. He's responsible for, the brake system on your car, the automatic transmission, the refrigerator, uh, many other various things that people use to this very day, the traffic light, the gas mask. All of these things would not exist without the black man, and not respecting that sort of dynamic of a different people really has set a precedent for blunder after blunder after blunder, where United States cannot seem to figure it. I should say the hegemonic powers of the United States cannot seem to, to do business abroad without using a sledgehammer, which makes it difficult for the rest of the people who look just like those in these hegemonic positions to actually do business in other places, because no one really takes you seriously, at least not at this point, in the 2019, 2020 and beyond. Um, it's getting increasingly difficult for people to really take the West seriously anymore. I mean, at least those with blue eyes and pale skin. It makes it very difficult. So now you have an emerging Africa that is accelerating at a pace that is at least 10 to 20 years ahead of what was originally projected by those in the West. And now they don't understand, why would Africa want to do business with China? Why would they want to do business with Southeast Asia? Because that's where the deal is. The United States did not offer Africa the deal that they should have offered them in the first place. They should have organized black people in America to do business with the Africans on the continent. So therefore, you maintain a good posture, security posture, and economic posture with Africa without actually um, disrupting the culture on the ground. And unfortunately, just like the article was pointing out, they underestimated China, and they also underestimated Russia as well. Russia is still resilient to this very day despite the sanctions.
Well, that's true. They actually forced Russia and China to start dealing with each other on a level that they never used to before. Because now the Russian and Chinese economy are they're not perfectly intertwined, but they're somewhat intertwined. Because Russia, look at Russia building a pipeline all the way across Russia into China to provide gas for China.
Right.
You know, um, this is the food that China import. China used to import food from America. You um, from Europe. Russia used to import food from Europe. Now Russia is growing its food
And then
and
export.
exporting food to China. So they're forcing things to happen that shouldn't happen. Now Russia is going into Africa, and Africa, if if they can clean up the wars like the war they do it in the DEC, uh, then that land can produce food. I mean, they're Saudi Arabia is got farms in Africa, huge farms that they grow food. They can't grow food in Saudi Arabia, so they got to grow the food in Africa.
Hmm.
That's how much land is available, and they didn't. I'm not saying the Africans can't use that land, but this is land that otherwise would be unused. You know, so like you said, why didn't America just encourage African Americans to integrate into African society? You know, send these people over there and create a back and forth. You know, integrated society of Black Americans here. That's one of the ridiculous thing that they should have done that they didn't do.
Right. It's the greed of pale skinned people that don't seem to understand that other people don't move like you, and that led to a lot of it led to a lot more issues than what was originally thought out, and no one really feels sorry for them either. I mean, not to say that Africans are enjoying are living in the lap of luxury, but they're actually doing much better now under underneath the power of chopsticks and duck sauce than they are with shepherd's pie, if that makes any sense.
Well, one of the problems they have now is lead directly to Brexit. Seriously. And the French being incapable of holding up their end of the three-legged stool in the EU. Because all the money that they used to pick out of Africa. With all that money going east now, instead of going to Europe and America, it's causing a problem.
Mm-hmm. All right, this next one is from the MiamiHerald.com. UN sets stage for end of peacekeeping in Haiti. A worried Dominican Republic objects. The United Nations Security Council on Friday renewed its justice support peacekeeping mission in Haiti for a final 6 months, after which it will maintain only a special political mission in the crisis-ridden nation after October 15th. Council members voted 13-0 in favor of the final 6 months renewal, with the Russian Federation and Dominican Republic both abstaining. The Dominican Republic, which shares the island of Hispaniola with Haiti, called the withdrawal of peacekeepers in 6 months. As Haiti continues to face an ongoing political and economic crisis, deteriorating humanitarian conditions, and State Department traveling warning premature. For the Dominican Republic, the peacekeeping mission will come to an end. At the same time, we are expecting to see elections held in Haiti, a moment that can fall into instability. Ambassador Jose Weisinger said, we believe that we should weigh the moment and the conditions for this. The work for this Security Council is to ensure that there is international peace. Haiti, which has a messy history with elections, is scheduled to hold legislative and local elections in October. Last week, during the Security Council discussions on the situation in the country ahead of the Friday's vote, U.S. Acting Permanent Representative Jonathan Cohen stressed that the timing of the election should not be a factor on when peacekeeping missions end. We do not believe this council should link scheduled transition to legislative and local elections in Haiti scheduled for October 2019, Cohen said. The United Nations first deployed a blue helmeted peacekeeping force to Haiti in 2004, consisting of a large multinational military presence with soldiers from Brazil, Chile, Nepal, and other nations. They steered Haiti through several hurricanes and tumultuous elections and a deadly 2010 earthquake. In 2017, with a mixed legacy of controversy and stability, the Security Council began the withdrawal of the military soldiers, but left foreign police officers to continue to provide support to the United Nations trained Haiti National Police Force. The smaller peacekeeping missions, which is now ending in October, focus on justice, human rights, and police development. I find that to be hilarious because that they do the complete opposite. But I'm curious about the Russian angle because Russia abstained from this. And what we saw on the ground was that there were Haitians on the ground on social media requesting that the Russians come in and assist Haiti. You see, people with social media now, people can see what Russia did in Syria. And the hatred for the West and more importantly, the United States has given unnecessary clout to Russia. So now Russia doesn't have to clout chase. People would say, well, I don't like the West, so therefore we're going to Russia. Everybody wants to be down with Russia even if they don't know where Russia is on the map. They just don't. They don't care. They see Vladimir Putin. They see Russia. They see a strong state. They see a state that stands up to, um, that can stand up to the West, or more importantly, the United States. And what they did in Syria is a demonstration of standing strong. What do you think about this, D? What do you think about this, Jack?
Yeah, definitely. You know, I was discussing with a friend of mine. He's Haitian, and he was telling me, what was like from growing up. And pretty much he had to face a lot of adversity just to even get over here to U.S. But he said he was explaining to me that from his perspective that they need help, man. They need help, and UN is not helping them. They need to get out because UN pretty much they were just a bunch of hooligans while they were there. Now they're asking for help from Russia, which they know that that would make a difference because nobody's really in Haiti's corner, man. The countries that are people that are there, are raping the system, and taking advantage of just the people there, and the resources. And they all know that. They all see that, and they want change, man. And they continue to tear the country apart, man. I think personally that if Russia was to interfere and give assistance, it would make a big difference. But again, what would U.S. think about that? They would um, in terms of UN need to get up on it. They don't need UN there because UN again, this was the cholera outbreak from the rapings of women. They left children there, and, and they don't report that. Al Jazeera put a documentary out about that, but a lot of other outlets don't really go into that. But I personally think that it's time for a change there, man, because you know people are giving up, man. The youth right now, they're fighting for change, but people are literally starting to give up because it's like, yo, nobody's helping us. So I think it's a travesty what's going on there. And again, like I said, if Russia were to intervene, only thing I think is the U.S. will take that as perceived as a threat. What do you think?
We'll leave that to DE. DE, are you there?
Oh, I was just listening and I was talking to my son. So I wasn't paying a lot of attention to what's going on. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I think that obviously Russia coming into Haiti would be a big threat to the United States. Obviously, they would have to come at it from a different angle, and that angle would have to be something like, sending a education minister or in a energy minister or some form of soccer, athletic minister of athletics or something like that, something that's more benign. They could actually get in there because they've, had stronger relations with Cuba, and they had no problems flying their planes back and forth to Cuba, which is not too far away from Haiti. So they can do some things, but Russia doesn't see a whole lot of benefit into going into Haiti, as they did with Cuba, and Cuba was strategic for them because of their physical position, their geographical position in the Caribbean. But Haiti, on the other hand, is such a basket case. Uh, made all ruined by you know, the United States for that matter, and I would say Canada as well. The Canadians are just as much at fault to this. So Russia sees this as something that it's a hot potato that they don't want to get themselves be the last ones holding the potato, because then they would have to own it, and that's not something they want to do. So they see a lot of interest in Venezuela because Venezuela has been a you know, a strong investor and economic dealer with Russia, whereas Haiti doesn't really have anything to leverage um, with an outside power like Russia. Now, what they can do is they could create a strong relationship with Haiti through Venezuela, because Venezuela has a strong relationship with Haiti. However, it would be difficult for Russia to go in directly with their pale faces as as the Americans have, and actually work something out. They could work on what we call low hanging fruit. They could utilize um, bringing Haitian women in on a humanitarian mission and turn them into nurses, right? Train them to be nurses and send them right back into Haiti, and they could take the men and turn them into you know, civil engineers, you know, through carpentry and like journeyman electricians and plumbers and gas fitters and things like that. They could actually do things like that. Those are the small, low hanging fruit that I'm referring to. So
Well, I agree with. I think that's a great idea. In terms of their relationship with the AU, I think that's another relationship that they can progressively grow. But the thing is that you know, isn't the AU already tied in? Like they're in bed with China right now. So I know Haiti has a lot of Chinese investors there already.
right.
So I think they might have to work that avenue. But again, it's a leadership, and Haiti kind of turning their back on the U.S. presence there already. So um, that's just the biggest feat right there. You know, they're turning their back because you already see the lengths that U.S. is willing to go with sending missionaries there. I'm sorry, mercenaries there. They have certain people planted in certain areas. You know, again, we discussed it. For certain things are being traded there. So um, it's gonna take the people kind of like becoming resilient and kind of like we don't need anybody else's help, and then working things out from the inside out, and then kind of uh, trying to extend that relationship with the AU, because they already have a relationship there already. And so again, it doesn't take leadership. It's gonna take somebody young who is uh who is a leader to kind of like forge that relationship and make that a main goal. Because again, the main issue with Haiti is education, right? People want an education, but they can't get one. And the infrastructure, they put money into infrastructure, but it's not completed. So people are just kind of taking the money and not completing certain projects. So I think it's
Right.
going to be the younger generation going to have to kind of like tie the bootstraps and kind of take the hem there. And there's some there willing to do it, but it's also going to take those in the U.S., which I'm noticing now a lot of millennials, who are first generation Haitian Americans in the U.S. are kind of going back now and like, okay, they want to make a difference, but again, it's having the right points of contact to do that. So um, that's just my thoughts on it. As far as
Yeah.
getting,
Yeah. Absolutely. It, go ahead, D.
I want to say this. I don't know how what Charles think of this, but I think the UN getting out of Haiti is the best thing that can happen to Haiti. And
I agree with that. I agree.
Haiti is in a position where Venezuela was in when Chavez came to power, because you got like 1% of Haiti who's educated abroad owns all the money. or steals all the money, I should say. Haiti has a lot of resources, and the resources that are coming out are controlled by the elite and the UN, from what I'm seeing. Charles hit on a point there that the Haitians from abroad have to go back home and change the system. It's not gonna rise up from internal. The last time that there was an internal anybody rose up from the inside the country was the Catholic priest. I can't remember his name. When he got elected and started to make changes, and then the U.S. said, no, 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 you can't do that, and got rid of him. But the the best strategy would be for Haitians from Canada, from the U.S., from other places that they've gone and got educated and some measure of wealth to go back to Haiti and start changing Haiti. You're not going to be able to go become president because somebody's going to kill you. But you got to go back there, start opening businesses, and start spreading out throughout the society and change it from internal.
I 100% agree with you on that, DE. That's what it's gonna take the millennials, but the millennials right now, that's their goal. They're like they want to get back. They want to retire there. That's the main goal. Like I want to retire there too. The thing is that the country's in shambles. So that's like literally the plan amongst amongst most of the Haitian Americans I know right now. They're like they want to start businesses there. They want to get things going, but this is the whole political climate. Uh, It's just terrible, right? They fly into Haiti. They go to Port-au-Prince to get to the airport. They want to get the heck up out of Port-au-Prince and go where they got to go to next because they know that um, it's that bad there. So, which is not a bad thing because again they want change, right? And again, U.S. has their foot on a lot of people's necks, but I think I see a resurgence of just a lot of uh, again the first generations like going back. They want to start businesses there. They want to retire there. They're um they're making moves, but it's just you gotta wait for things to play out. And I also want to see. It's going to be interesting. I think a big game changer is going to be the whole economic and technological boom of Africa. Once that happens on the continent over there, I think you know once they get on their feet, they're going to start reaching out to other, or I guess you want to say that ADOS and whatever, but they're going to start reaching out and they're going to start opening their hands, opening their doors. Hey, if you want to contribute and you have something good, let's go. Because the thing is that we don't really have, we have the homeland, but we don't have like the infrastructure there yet. Once the infrastructure is there, you're going to see you're going to start seeing it spread out. So when you look at the whole nature thing, it's going to take time, man. It's a whole waiting game, and it's going to be a lot of time. The tides are changing right now when it comes to blacks, especially abroad. But it's going to take time, and I think it's going to take about another. When it comes to Haiti, I think about 30 or 40 years. That's when you start seeing things change. It's going to take uh, U.S. influence, starting to wane a lot more, and then um, all the continents of Africa, all the countries of Africa, power starting to rise. So it's gonna take time, man. But I think it will happen again. Because again, like Haiti has a vast amount of resources that people don't even know, man. It's like so many resources. The whole situation with gold is real, man. There's so much resources there, but again, is that you know they have nobody to really help them, and they look for help too much. They don't work from within, and that's the problem. So.
Well,
Yeah. If
I,
Haiti don't, sorry, if Haiti don't rise up, alongside Africa is going to pretty much stay in its position or close to the position that it's in right now. Because what's going to happen is that places like the U.S., because you're seeing a resurgence of pride and black people pride here in the U.S. You're seeing it in Brazil, and those are two of the largest diaspora populations. So as Africa rises, these two are going to rise, and they're going to be like a triangle between Africa, the U.S., blacks in the U.S., and blacks in South America. And if there's a black population in China, they also going to be, it's going to be like this pyramid, either 3 or 4 sides. And the smaller countries are going to find themselves doing the same thing that they do now, which is like go to the US, go to Canada, go to England, but they will be going to Africa. They're still going to be going to the US, they're going to be going to Brazil, they're going to China. So Haiti's going to be caught in this little thing because of the size of the country. If they don't rise up and kind of be like the leading edge, then it pretty much might fail. I don't know if you guys understand that exactly what I'm trying to say, but
No, I understand what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. I think there's also incumbent upon us in America to actually do some work as well. You know, we have to start building an institution that represents African Americans' interests on a global scale, not just on a local politics scale. I know a lot of people say, "Oh, all politics are local," but you know, there is a diaspora outside of the United States that is in need of assistance, and the people within the United States that are sitting within the global power are not doing enough, if they're doing anything at all. So what I'm saying here is, what I'm proposing here is that we need an African American Union that interfaces with all other global powers to actually carry out operations that are in our vested interest and the interests of the people who look just like us. It doesn't make any sense to leave Haitians to fend for themselves internally when a lot of their help is going to come from the outside and not from the inside. I mean, yeah, they'll overthrow one person, but then they won't get any civility either. Mostly because uh, they don't have the arms to actually fend off, a government. You know, the only reason Sudan was able to overthrow their government is, as we covered earlier, was because they had outside influence. Same thing in Algeria last week or 2 weeks ago, and as well as Egypt. You know, with Mohammed Morsi. You know, the only reason they were able to throw him out of office was because they had outside influence. Um, and you see what happened in Syria. You know, despite all the guns and ammunition that the terrorists had, they weren't able to take down Bashar al-Assad because he had outside help too. So there's no way to really rectify these things without Black American influence. Black Americans need to waive their political power on a global scale, not just on a local scale. You know, I think far too often Black people are caught up trying to appease, pale skinned people just to get brownie points. And it's like you have to think on a bigger, more larger scale that there are a lot of things that can be done, but you're not waving you're not wielding your power in a way that is actually useful. Um, just imagine if Black people had an organized political body that would land, that they pay for their own um, their own jets and things like that to go back and forth between Africa and to go back and forth between Latin America and the Caribbean and things of that nature, and set up, consulates and embassies everywhere necessary, and use that power, use that political power to influence, better relations. I think we just didn't do enough.
You know what?
I was listening to I can't remember this guy's name now. Shoot. I was online with him today. I'll get his name when I send it to you, Mike. But I was listening to him today, and he was talking about doing something similar to that. And Man of Tomorrow was on with him, as a matter of fact. They were talking, they were discussing something similar to what we're talking about now, how how to lead Black America out of, you know, kind of like separate the nation of Black America from the rest of the nation. I was listening to his blog today, and they were talking about that. So I don't know if I think you got Man of Tomorrow as one of your contributors. You should talk to him and get him on.
Uh, are you talking about Obsidian?
No, man, no, please, no. Obsidian don't use his knowledge for anything other than talking about women, man. I can't. If you ever got a problem with the women, but you can't just stay there. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, I do think that on a serious note, I do think that that's the framework that needs to be put in place. There needs to be an AAU that actually communicates that out, and utilizes the power of the dollar. Um, the power of the dollar is very powerful for African Americans and could be utilized for way more things. We talked about the need for in military industrial complex that can employ a lot of black people, men and women, especially a lot of your mechanics, your carpenters, and guys like that, or people like that. And then you take in you need people that can make uniforms. That that's a lot of black women who know how to sew and things like that. They can actually start making uniforms and other forms of garments. Same thing with guys who are in the Air Force and in the Navy who have the better foresight as for what it takes for maritime operations and air superiority and things of that nature. There's so many avenues that can be gone down. I think the problem is that people's priorities are much different now than what they were before. I know Garvey tried that with the United Negro Association. So back then, I think black people had their back against the wall um, in terms of racism and segregation. So it was fertile ground to do that back then, even despite the fact that A. Philip Randolph and the rest of these guys kind of ran them off.
Bro, that I have a dream speech destroyed Black American. I'm not kidding you. Every time I hear that thing, it's I have to shake my head.
So you don't think? Okay, so this is good. This is a topic I always want to speak about, right? Um, when it comes to segregation, back then segregation and the integration situation, and there was a big push for integration. I look at the numbers now, right? Let's look at the statistics. Yeah, more people got education, but I think the numbers, things didn't really change. So do you think we're better off just being segregated back then, and then to now? You think things would have been a lot different? Um, what's your thoughts on that? Because that's something I always pondered, but nobody really discusses that. So what's your thoughts on that?
Well, you have a situation where you are forced to build your own, do for self, and we went from building our own and doing for self to expecting someone else to build for us and crying when they don't. It's only now this what we call the fourth industrial revolution is providing a door for us to kind of like step through. And then again, enough of us are not stepping through that door as we had, say, it up to about 1960. Before, you had a black teacher teaching a classroom, and out of that classroom, if you can survive high school, you go into college. If you didn't have to, even though some kids had to get out of school in the afternoon and go help their parents pick cotton, a lot of them still became doctors and lawyers and teachers themselves, and they got degrees. But now it's not going that way at all. They have the opportunity. You go to school and you come home in the evening, you got a computer in front of you, but instead of using that computer to, I don't know, learn about Bitcoin or blockchain or engineering of some kind, of how to build your own car, because it's all here in that computer. They're playing games on it. That's my opinion. Anybody there?
Well, I got you. So,
I was
so you
talking,
think
but I was muted.
Oh, go ahead, Mike.
No, I was just saying with DE, I agree with him. But and there's more than one way to skin a cat. So I think what's happening here is that, at least in regards to African Americans, I think that too often they stick with one way of doing things, even if that way is not the right way to do it. They just stick with it anyway. So therefore, the results are not plentiful in anything to take into regards.
Yeah, because I was pondering what if we did have a fully functional AA, like, that would be impactful, man. And we were really moving the dollar, right?
You broke up a lot there, Jack. I would advise you to either log off and log back on, or
Not a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about the Lebanese and
mhm,
how they travel all over the world, and wherever they go, they support Lebanon.
right.
And we have a tendency not to do something like that, not to, because they see everybody as family. If family rise, country rise, but we don't see it. It's like we took on the individuality thing, you know.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, it's not just Lebanon that does it. With with Hezbollah, quite a few Arab Muslim villages and communities do that. I work with a couple of guys from Syria, and they're from Damascus, and they do the same exact thing. You know, they'll drive, like, guys work in IT. They'll drive for Uber and Lyft after work, and all that money they collect, a lot of that goes right back home. Um, Here you don't hear, not so much. I think what's happening with Black people is that they want a community based on their terms, and what their terms are does not determine a. It's not going to determine the outcome of a more positive society that they're pontificating about. It's impractical. There's
Well,
no there's no way that if we don't have some kind of public banking system for ourselves and we don't have a institutional political body that's going to represent our interests on a global scale, it's not going to happen. The Lebanese, in terms of Hezbollah, have 2/3 of their political seats in Congress, in Parliament. I mean, and that keeps them, in their sphere of influence politically, and they have a political body, and they have a paramilitary force that's 70,000 strong. You just can't beat that from a template standpoint.
yep. With that freedom, there's some responsibility that you got to take on. There's a lot of responsibility that you got to take on, and we just look at the freedoms. Well, I'm free to do this. I'm free to. If I make $1, I can spend the whole dollar. But what do you spend it on? You should be thinking about what that freedom grants you. The freedom to not only spend that dollar on you, but to make sure that that dollar helps somebody else that that looks like you.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't do that. If I get well, not me, I don't do that foolishness at all. But I get a job. I don't. First thing I do is, well, I got a job now, so my image, the girls gotta know, so I gotta buy a Benz or a Beamer. That's not me, and that's what a lot of us see freedom as. We gotta get this car, even though if you don't have some place to park it, it's parked on the street.
Right.
It's parked on the street, and you don't have a house, and your family is renting. You know that freedom doesn't allow you to spend $600 a month on car payments. Well, you don't have a house. But some people take it to mean that, and that's what they do.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah. My final comments was just that, based on the discussions that we had, it's definitely institutional building needs to be done first and foremost, and then industry industry development in terms of the fourth industrial revolution needs to be focused on digital architecture or digital infrastructure needs to be focused on in terms of infrastructure development, as well as civil engineering needs to be focused on as well. Take advantage of military industrial complex while it's still here, because many of these nations with people who look like us are in need of um, civic security. So these are
Yep.
areas that we can actually dominate in.
Oh yeah. I mean, how many black people had military duty in the United States? One of the most technologically advanced militaries in the world. You know,
Hmm.
you went there. Even though you didn't only learn the technology, but you learned management, how to manage your time, how to manage your knowledge. All that you're given when you came out of the military. What did you do with it?
Right.
You know? So
So, something needs to be written. There needs to be a blueprint designed. I mean, I know that Garvey had a blueprint with the UNIA, but that's not. Um, it needs to be modernized, and it needs to be designed around the needs of the people today, not what was going on back then, because we don't live like we were back then. So
you're right, because today technology is making things more accessible and cheaper. So we talk about community banking and community activities to create the atmosphere that we want for ourselves. So that's the opening.
yep. All right, thank you all for joining us, and we will be back on Friday with economics.
All right, good night, everybody.